All right, today we're jumping into a huge question. What exactly is the self? We're going to take a trip through philosophy, neuroscience, and even evolutionary biology to really challenge the idea of who or what we think we are. So let's get right into it.
So let's start at the very heart of the matter. You know that voice in your head? That constant feeling that there's a single, continuous you piloting your body? Is that feeling a fundamental fact of reality, or is it something else entirely?
Well, philosopher Thomas Metzinger has a pretty startling answer for us. He suggests that our sense of self isn't some deep truth we uncover. It's more like a story the brain tells itself. And, as he puts it, it's a functionally adequate form of self-deception. In other words, it's a useful illusion, a trick that helps us get through the day.
Okay, so let's really explore this first big idea. What if the self isn't some permanent, solid thing at all? What if it's just a process, a program that's constantly running in the background, a simulation we're so deep inside we can't even tell it's there?
This idea is called the self model, and here's the best way to think about it. Imagine your brain is this super complex piece of hardware. The self model is like its user interface. It makes everything feel simple and unified. But here's the catch. The interface is perfectly transparent. You don't see the interface itself, you just see through it. And so you mistake the simulation for reality. You think you are the model.
So this leads to a really fascinating question. If the self is just a simulation, can you turn it off? I mean, is it even possible to experience the world without that filter of me and I? And what would that even feel like?
That very question leads us to our next section, exploring states of mind where that self-model seems to fade away, leaving something else behind. Something you could call a state of pure awareness. Researchers and mystics call this pure consciousness, or sometimes minimal phenomenal experience. It's the raw experience of awareness itself, without the story of you layered on top. It's not the thought, I am aware, it's just the being aware part.
And it turns out, there are a couple of major pathways people take to get to this state. On one hand, you have meditation, the ancient, disciplined practice of quieting the constant chatter of the mind. On the other, you've got psychedelics, which can kind of chemically kickstart a very similar state of ego dissolution. And what's wild is that the sources we're looking at suggest that in terms of the raw experience, these two very different roads can lead to the exact same place.
But, the self-model doesn't always dissolve so gracefully. Sometimes it just malfunctions. It gets stuck in these really damaging loops. So what happens then? And is there any way to fix it?
This is where we shift from philosophy to straight-up practical intervention. We're going to look at how science is trying to get its hands dirty and directly interface with the brain's hardware to fix some of these glitches in our mental operating system.
Addiction is a really powerful example of this. You can think of it as a nasty bug in the self model. The parts of your brain that are supposed to be in charge of impulse control and long-term planning get hijacked by a really powerful short-term reward signal. The I that wants to quit is literally being overpowered by a hardware problem in the brain.
And this isn't just a metaphor. What you're looking at here is the actual flowchart for a randomized clinical trial. Researchers are using technology to see if they can go in and directly reboot these hijacked brain circuits in people with alcohol dependence. So how's it work? Well, they use this technique called RTMS. They send magnetic pulses to a very specific part of the brain, one that's crucial for self-control. The big idea was to see if this stimulation could jolt the system back online, to improve that cognitive control and reduce impulsivity when compared to a placebo. This is a direct attempt to repair the self-model's hardware. But we don't need to look at extreme cases like addiction to see the self-model at work. Its default settings, its particular style, is quietly shaping every single choice we make all day, every day.
This brings us to the really subtle but incredibly powerful ways our own internal models shape how we see the world, especially when we have to make a decision.
So let's look at one style in particular, the maximizer. We all know this person. This is the friend who spends 3 weeks researching every possible coffee maker online because they absolutely have to make the single best choice. And, on the surface, that sounds pretty smart. All that research, all that careful thinking. Surely that has to lead to better decisions in the end, doesn't it? Well, nope. The research found the complete opposite. The more people tried to maximize and find that one perfect choice, the worse their actual decision-making competence was. The obsession with being perfect can literally paralyze you and lead to worse outcomes. It just goes to show that the particular style of your self-model can have a huge effect on your life.
Okay, let's zoom the camera all the way out one last time. We've talked about the self as this flexible, repairable, sometimes buggy model. If that's true, what does this concept of a flexible self mean for how we think about life itself on the grand scale of evolution?
This leads us to a really cool twist on a very famous phrase. Not survival of the fittest, but survival of the fitted.
This slide really breaks down the difference. The classic idea, survival of the fittest, paints evolution as a brutal, head-to-head competition for limited stuff. But this other view, survival of the fitted, is more creative. It says life isn't just about winning a fight. It's about finding, or even better, building, a unique spot, a niche, where you fit in perfectly. It's about cooperation and creating your own game.
And this quote just lands the point so well. We didn't outcompete the great apes in their own environment. You could say we were actually failed apes. We couldn't win that game, so we just left. We used our strange, flexible self-models and our ability to cooperate to build a totally new world, a human niche for ourselves.
And that's the ultimate takeaway. If our sense of self is just a flexible model and our world is a niche that we actively build, well, that's an incredible power and an incredible responsibility. It means the story of who we are and the world we live in isn't set in stone. We are writing it, right now. And so that leaves us with one final massive question. What will we choose to build next?